Welcome to AI in Learning, a series that unites today's most forward-thinking voices in learning and artificial intelligence. Together, we'll explore not just what's changing, but what it means for how people learn, grow, and stay relevant. Each conversation goes beyond the trends and buzzwords to understand real shifts that are happening in skills, tools, and mindsets that are shaping the future of learning at work. All right, welcome everybody to another installment of AI in Learning. My name is Justin Seeley, and I'm a senior learning evangelist here at Adobe. Today, I'm genuinely excited because we're joined by somebody whose work has really been influencing a lot of the conversations happening in leadership, talent, and the future of work. He's the founder of Hedrick Advisory, a research firm focused on what it takes for humans to thrive in this new AI-shaped world that we all find ourselves living in. And before that, he served as chief learning officer at Citi, where he led learning and culture for more than 200,000 employees globally. He's also the author of the widely referenced framework From Prompt-to-Polymath, which many in the learning space, including myself, view as a compass for AI adoption and workforce evolution. So please welcome Mr. Cameron Hedrick to the show. Cameron, thanks a lot for joining us.
Justin, it's so great to be here with you. I love this whole evangelist idea. It's great. I'm just honored to be here. Thanks for that very generous introduction.
Absolutely. Yeah, evangelism, it's a strange title, but a very fun job, I can honestly say. If anybody out there ever wants to learn more about it, there's a great book by Guy Kawasaki called Selling the Dream that I learned a lot from about how to do this. So that's kind of where I started.
That's good. That's a good tip.
But let's start off with a little bit of an icebreaker and talk about if you could go back and play one more gig with that combo from the 90s, where would it be and why?
Okay. That's deep research. So good on you. So what Justin's referring to is I was a jazz musician. That was my first big real job for a long time. Well, until my mid-20s. And I had a group called Blue Acoustic. It was a group of 5 of us in the early 90s. So to answer your question directly, we did a lot of gigs in Little Rock, Arkansas. And one of the places that we played a lot back then was called the Oyster Bar. We played a lot of places there, but we were the house band at the Oyster Bar every Friday or Saturday night. I can't remember. But if I could just go back just one more time and do that again and play like I used to be able to play and meet all the people that used to come out recurringly, that would be a dream come true. What a fun question. Thanks.
Absolutely. Let's continue that thought process there. Like, what did that era about your career, what did that teach you about collaboration or improvisation that you think kind of still shows up in the work that you do today?
So I started playing trumpet in the 5th or 6th grade. Now, I didn't know this at the time. This is all, I can see it now because I'm old and I can see the outlines of my life now. I couldn't see it then, but being a musician taught me a number of things. And just off the top of my head, first is discipline, because you got to put a lot of hours in that nobody sees, nobody cares about. It's just a grind, but you just get used to it because for every 1 minute on stage, there's countless hours in the practice room. I learned, you mentioned it, I learned the value of collaboration. So when you play in a band, there are times when you're the soloist and you need to be out front, but most of the time you're a part of an ensemble. You need to step back and, be a part of the group and play with the group. That's super helpful in the rest of your life. The last one was getting comfortable with critique. In sports and in music, people pay coaches to critique them. You get used to it. Every single passage critiqued. And then in the business world, I don't see that as much. So those are just a handful of the things I'm really grateful for that are wired into me because of music.
Let's move on and talk about YIELD XYZ, because this is something I'm super interested in and I want to dive into it with you. So you designed YIELD XYZ to help us think about what humans need to thrive in this new AI reality that we all kind of find ourselves in. So if somebody's just hearing about that for the first time on this show, how would you describe it to them?
Let's start with just a 30-second primer on what happened before YIELD XYZ, because it grounds probably everything we'll be talking about for the next many minutes. But I retired recently from Citi Group, and you just referenced that, after 20 plus years. And I was in various senior HR positions across the course of that time. And then the last 3 years of my time there, when ChatGPT, OpenAI released the first really consumer publicly available LLM, I used it extensively, crazy amounts of time. And I began to see where the future was going with intelligence. I say that's a backdrop to answer the YIELD XYZ question because while most people were rightly and understandably focusing on everything that's going to change, as do I now, I started to ask what is going to stay stable over the long course of time. And from that came the YIELD XYZ thesis, which is simply the following. The great leaders with whom I worked as a senior HR executive over the course of many years tended three things simultaneously that are all interconnected. So X, I just named this, X is self-awareness, self-knowing, self-control, receiving critique, inviting critique, not taking personally, just all things self-awareness and self-mastery. X. Y, team awareness, team coherence, psychological safety, making sure that it is there so the best of the team can come out. That's Y. And Z is organizational coherence, which simply means making sure that all the systems, capital S systems, not tech systems, are congruent and serve and create the conditions for the outcomes that you hope for. YIELD XYZ. So now the way I view the world is these are deeply human characteristics that will endure. And now, to your point, they're also augmented and really just helped a lot by artificial intelligence. So that's the origin of YIELD XYZ and how I use it in my work today.
So as part of the X part of that, the self-awareness part of it, I think, skilling in the age of AI has become a really huge priority, especially for, organizations. How do we upskill people in this age of AI? But also I think for the learners themselves, to be self-aware about what type of skills do I need and things like that. In your experience at Citi, like, was this something you guys were thinking about, like, even back then? How do you think about it now? What are your thoughts on skilling, and how responsible is the organization versus the individual when it comes to leveling up skills?
Well, the answer to the last part of the question first, which is the individual really must be in control. I cannot, as a CLO or a head of HR, I cannot motivate a person to go and learn and reconfigure, shed old things, bring on new things. I just can't. So I always say, I'm not the learning police or the development police. You must own that individually. But let's go back to the beginning of your question. Look, skilling as a concept has been around since all of time, all the way back to caveman days, where at some point somebody learned how to make a spear or learned how to make a fire and taught another person and passed on that skill. It's the same thing today, except the skills are more sophisticated. The transference mechanisms are more sophisticated. The measurement of it more sophisticated. So same basic thing. It's just the distribution tools and the way we upskill and reskill have changed.
And what do you think the biggest challenges are when you're trying to scale skilling across like a large organization, like a city with that many people? Like what challenges did you face with that?
Ironically, it was never the content itself. We could create the content and put it on Rails to get it to the learner. We could do that pretty reliably. Harkening back to what I said a couple seconds ago, the biggest challenge is the individual motivation to learn and to reconfigure some of the cultural norms that might be there that might impel or sort of hold people back from jumping into the learning and trying new things. So over the course of my time in these roles, I really began to see that I had to treat the cultural and the conditions part of the equation as much as I did the content and distribution part of my job, because together I could start to understand better, like what's going to take, what's not going to take over the course of time.
Yeah, I think that resonates a lot with how I ran my learning teams myself, because one of the biggest things I always told people is that we are not a content factory. We're a remover of friction. And if the learner has less friction, then the content we create will be more easily absorbed and more sticky, all those types of things. And so I always looked at, what not so much how much could we add, but what could we take away? How can we remove certain roadblocks or things that frustrate people, things like that. And I think with skilling, that's also a big part of it. Tell me what I need to know in order to get from point A to point B or vice versa, and I'll kind of do that myself. I feel like humans are motivated by clear pathways and removing those friction points.
You said it perfectly. And if you're a CPO or a CLO or an aspiring or a aspiring head of HR, aspiring chief learning officer, you must listen to exactly what Justin just said. Our job is to remove as much friction as we can, so those that are inspired and willing and ready to go and learn and try new things have the least resistance. Full stop. Because you cannot control the internal equation. So yes, well said. Now, let's think about the long arc of resistance in learning, just for 30 seconds. We have been lowering the barriers to learning over the course of hundreds of years, right? But, it used to just be oral tradition, you passing along knowledge to another person. And then the printing press came so you could distribute knowledge. And then I'm jumping a lot around here, but then the internet came and democratization and the whole thing. Now AI and search, all these things have really lowered the barrier to entry, which is why I kind of always anchor on what is the humans, the individual's stake in the game and how willing are they to go after it. Inside the organization, again, if you're a CPO or a CLO or aspire to be that, it becomes more of a question outside of culture, like what's the economics of reducing friction? Like how can you do that in a cost-effective way, which is a whole nother long, fun discussion.
And do you think that AI is going to be a major factor in helping us quantify the reduction of that friction?
It not only helps us reduce the friction, it also helps us quantify the yield on that learning. And let's talk about how. Now, there's some upsides and some downsides to everything we're going to talk about, but I'm generally positive oriented. We could talk about the negative stuff too if you want. But look, now with just LLMs like they are right now, if they never improve, like we now have a really smart, helpful, sometimes sycophantic, but we can get through that, helper on our shoulder at all times it's very good with words. It's pretty good with numbers, and it's amazing at coding. So the friction of just learning and receiving information and learning it from different angles through AI has already revolutionized learning, full stop. That's the intake bit. The measurement bit, like you mentioned, now we're not quite here yet, but here's the future that I see. Through passive inference, there's some creepy parts of this. We'll get to that in a minute, but AI can watch you move in context, in flow through your organization and begin to infer what skills and attributes are present in Cameron or Justin. What is the quality of those skills or attributes? In what context? That's a different level of measurement that we've ever seen. It puts Kirkpatrick in the dark. That was great for decades, but the future of measurement as it relates to knowledge and contribution is about to completely change.
All right, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about Prompt-to-Polymath. So you created this framework called Prompt-to-Polymath, and I want to know, like, when leaders ask you to explain it in practical terms, especially those who just want to know what changes for their people specifically, how do you describe it to them?
Prompt-to-Polymath is a thesis about how AI will move from outside the workplace or the edges of the workplace to the center. That's what I start by telling them. And the reason I wrote it is I think there's only one cardinal sin as a leader that's out there, and that is it is not okay for you to not have an opinion about any major topic or major theme in the world that will impact you. And with all respect, I had too many conversations and asked people, well, how do you think this is going to go? What's next? And I got this look. I don't know. So I'll explain Prompt-to-Polymath in a minute, but the genesis of that was not to necessarily be right, but to put something out there that even if people hate it or think it's wrong or can attack it, fine, good. But it helps you have an opinion about where things are going. The basic outline goes like this, Justin. There's just 4 stages in Prompt-to-Polymath. It's about 9 months old, and so far it's going like I thought it would, and it's fine if it doesn't. Stage 1 is simply this. It's prompt-based AI tools, and the whole thesis is built around like they will come into your organization. Here's what they do. Here's what you need to do in reaction to just plain old simple prompt-based tools like we all have today. Stage 2 is called proxies and agents. So this is when AI agents start to show up. They're already here now. They weren't as much 9 months ago. And I use the term proxy to represent our digital twin, our avatar, our digital assistants that emulate Justin or Cameron or whoever's listening. Stage 3 is called connection and coherence. This is the one people seem to struggle with. Stage 1 and 2 people get. Stage 3 is connection and coherence. And the reason that's a separate stage is that my whole thesis is based on the following assumption, that the more context the AI has, the better it can do for you. So inside of a business, once the data sets begin to become better connected, which they're not very well connected today, they can infer and see patterns and sense things that they can't see today. So this connection and coherence phase will up the efficacy of AI. And then the final stage is called polymaths, semi or fully autonomous polymaths, which is really just a fancy way to say a more fully empowered, potentially AGI, but not quite, helper, like a digital teammate that's got a lot more autonomy. So that's the stages, and then along with each stage, there are organizational implications, risk implications, and the like that I write about.
And where do you think most organizations are in those stages right now? Like, in that spectrum, where do you think most people fall?
Many organizations have yet to fully achieve stage 1. Intra-company, yeah, I know. They might have LLMs, prompt-based LLMs, but a lot of them are restricted. Like the functionality of just your garden variety Anthropic, your Claudes, your Geminis, I'm going to offend somebody by not putting in their favorite, have a lot more functionality outside the organization. So I'm watching that carefully, but it's not as progressed as I thought it would be. As it relates to agents and proxies in motion in companies, no proxies yet. I've not found one, other than the CEO creating their, talk to the digital version of me, which is as close as that I've seen. Some agent uses, very small, and I've not seen the connection and coherence seems to be the booger that's just killing everybody, and no polymaths yet.
Yeah, I think this is something that, when we think about how we build products here at Adobe specifically, we're thinking about what this AI future looks like specifically within our learning products. And, we're very much, I think, still in the prompt era of a lot of what we're doing. But I see based on our roadmap and things like that, that we're moving towards that more agentic side of things. So for instance, like we announced recently the AI buddy, which is a learner facing assistant that can help you surface content. It knows things about you based on information that's stored inside the learning management system and all of that kind of stuff. I can see that. I also see this thing called AI coach that we're working on, where you can situationally discuss a course that you've just taken with an AI, and it can judge you on the efficacy of your learning retention, things like that. So I see this future. To me, though, it all feels fragmented to me. It doesn't feel like the future that's been promised to me. It's almost like, I thought when I watched Back to the Future that I'd have a hoverboard and self-lacing sneakers by today. Like, it's kinda like that. Like, I was sold AI a few years ago on this magical thing that it would be right now, and I still feel like what you said, we're still kind of on the left side of that spectrum. What's it gonna take to move us forward? Is that an educational problem with the users? Is that an innovation problem with the company? What do you see it as?
What a great question. I just always have to come back to agency first, human agency first before we move into the technical, my technical answer to your question. So the first, again, look, let me go at this a different way. You and I, and probably most of your listeners are pretty far down the AI path because we're into this thing. So we are wrong about the number of people that where they're at on their journey, and a lot of people don't understand it at all. Many people aren't using it at all. So before you even get inside the company sphere where there's tons of friction, it's just people are just not using it anyway. And I think that's problem one. Problem two is inside companies, even the ones that have very robust prompt-based tools right now, their culture may or may not support the use of those tools. So now you've got a human agency layer, and then you have a company cultural layer that is either, again, accelerating or trammeling individual use of AI, even in the prompt-based sphere. Then you get to the technical layer. And the biggest impediment to the technical layer inside the company anyway is this balkanization of data sets that you need to be connected to each other to create the context for better use. So long way of saying human agency first, company culture second, and then the technical layer thereafter. But they're all creating friction right now.
And I think a lot of organizations, especially because, from top down, they're getting mandates to do so, but a lot of organizations, they want to bring more AI into their learning ecosystem, but that foundation, whatever that may be, isn't always there yet. What do you think the first capabilities should be for them to focus on when they're building whatever it is that they're building so everything else can kind of grow around and on top of it? What are the basics that you have to have in place for this to be applicable, or not applicable, but foundationally solid?
Let me make sure I understand your question. You're asking for if you are the one inside a company building and deploying AI, what's the first thing to build? Is that
Yeah, let's say that I'm the CLO, right? And someone has come to me and said, we have to have AI in the learning ecosystem that we have.
in the
Whether
learning
that's
ecosystem?
Yeah, whether that's like the LMS, whether that's putting it within the flow of work, whatever it is. But I don't know the first thing about where to even start. Like, what's that baseline level of implementation that I need to put in there first so that I can build everything else you're talking about to get to those other levels on top of it?
All right, great. What a great question. First thing I would do, you're going to sick of me hearing this, is to make sure every single person in your learning organization is a power user of AI outside the company. They have to be using at least 2 hours a day in their personal lives. Because, and this is not the first time this has happened, technology efficacy outside the enterprise is actually it's better sometimes than inside the enterprise. So make sure they just understand it on that level. Second is, and you mentioned this earlier with Adobe, and I've seen that with Adobe, make sure that the foundational applications that you're using today for all sorts of things, design, development, delivery, all of it, make sure those providers are implementing various forms of AI in their tools. I made the mistake when I was a CLO, when this thing first popped, is that I thought that I would just need to bring in the AI separately from all the applications that I already had invested in. And that's, now I say I seem like that sounds very naive, but at the time I didn't know where this was going. So I would do that. And then finally, hopefully inside the company, you've got just basic LLMs that are good with words, that are connected to your content libraries. This is where I would start. I would start with the design and development shop to make sure that they are using these large language models for content outlines, visual creations, test writing, validation, and the like, interacting with that in a way that really it is cutting their time dramatically. That's where I would start if I were a CLO today.
Yeah, I think, on that first part of that where you're talking about the people themselves being power users outside of the organization, I think that's something that a lot of people gloss over. And when I go and I speak to these organizations, I go on a lot of client visits and things like that, and they ask me a lot of questions about how do I get my people better at AI. I always tell them, there's a big difference between literacy and fluency. And like, being literate about AI, understanding that what Chat GPT is, or what Gemini is way different than understanding how to get something meaningful out of it once you're using it. So I think, I would invest in training and upskilling that helps people understand how to better speak to these because they're all different as well, right? Like I did a talk in November called "It's Not Prompting, It's Creative Direction," where I try to get away from this idea that you're just throwing a basic query at it and hoping that it comes back with something magical. You've actually got to direct it like a creative director talking to a junior designer, like, to get the output that you want. And people were like blown away that like because I did a progressive thing where I did a basic prompt, I did a medium prompt, and then I did a really detailed prompt, and they saw the difference in the imagery for this advertisement I was creating or something like that. They couldn't believe the difference. And I think that's something that needs to be very illustrated for people, and they need to be grounded in that fact that, there is that difference between literacy and fluency when it comes to these tools.
So further to your point, which is fabulous. Yeah, if the nature of your question is more about content, like what as a CLO would I put out in content wise, obviously the tool has to be there. You have to have something to apply this learning to inside and outside the corporation. But sure, prompting, the way you explained it is much better. And most people, as you know, come at this prompting for the first time like a search engine. And I just take just a fairly different tact, which is like, no, treat it like a really smart friend. It's a conversation. It's the reason it's called a chat, because it's a back and forth. And when I started, the memory was this long. It remembered the last couple things you said, and then you go, hey, don't you remember 10, 20 minutes ago? Now it remembers a lot. It's a lot more robust. But let's go back to this. So let's assume that a person outside and inside of work is using it, and they're moving up into the fluency sphere, to use your point. Now we have something else that we have to deal with. I had a very brave person, more junior person, say this to me the other day in December, because most of the time I'm talking to very senior folks, and she said to me, "Hey, look, I get this thing. I use it a lot, and I can see that 50% of the work that I do could be done by this thing, but why am I going to confess to that? Why am I going to put my longevity on my job on the line?" Nobody has said that as clearly and as emotionally as she did, but we got to take that into consideration. And this goes back to the cultural thing. If the companies aren't saying to their people, we want you to re-engineer your own job, no company should ever guarantee employment. That's a fool's errand. But to encourage it, to bring it up above the waterline, to create some safety for people to do it, they're going to continue to hide in the shadows, even the smart ones. And I just, this is a complex equation. That's why I love it. But this is not this is a multidimensional opportunity.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think, as let's kind of pull on that thread a little bit, that human thread from that, because that is a very poignant discussion. And I think, as AI starts taking more initiative and the leaders start thinking about, what do we automate? What do we keep human? I want to understand, how do you coach leaders? And then if someone comes and asks you a question like that, what's your advice to somebody like that? So let's start with the leader perspective first. How are you advising them about what to keep human versus what to automate? And what's that triage checklist look like?
When I talk to very senior leaders, the main thing they want to talk about is the economics of this thing. So I lead with the economics, and I explain to them how to look at individual and collective role categories that are most ripe for full automation, not many, augmentation, almost all, what to keep human. There's a rubric that I have, a whole process to do that. And ironically, AI can do the analysis better than a human can. So for example, you can drop in the role of a bank teller and say, go and find all the bank teller job descriptions in the world, codify them, harmonize them, and then I want you to tell me which of those tasks, skills, tasks, etc., are automatable, augmentable, and what must remain human. There's your starting point. You've done it in 15 minutes. So, and there's an economic story behind that. So that's the leader view. I'm oversimplifying it, but that's where we start most of the time. The second thing I tell them is, but if you don't have a culture of receptivity if you don't have a culture that incents this and brings this out and makes it okay to do, then don't waste much money on this, because you're going to have so many silent resistors. It's going to be hard to get it through.
And then from the personal perspective, like when that junior person came to you, like what is your advice to people who are saying like, "Hey, I've realized this thing can cut my workload, but like why would I fess up to that?" What's your advice to people who are running into that?
I tell them they can either do it for themselves or have it done to them. That's it. Listen, we can debate capitalism and shareholder, all the economic, all the philosophical stuff underpinning public companies for sure. But they are going to go after the nexus of efficiency and effectiveness. That is going to happen. So if you are somebody that is not inclined to say, hey, I'm going to learn it, I'm going to grow, I'm going to be the one redefining my job with you, company people, senior managers, then you're going to fall victim to it. And I hope that doesn't sound too dark. That's my view. So my advice to them is be the one that's leading it, learn it, so you continue to reconfigure yourself.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I did a presentation, but also a paper that I worked on last year called The Prism. And basically, it frames AI as a giant beam of light. And without something to refract it through, you get blinded by it. Right. And so when you refract AI through the prism, you get this five-pronged approach. So PRISM stands for people, reflection, infrastructure, systems, and mindset. And so the people part of it is moving people from this mindset, or mindset comes later, but moving them from this idea that they are one thing in your organization and starting to give them AI enabled, AI empowered, whatever you want to call it, pathways forward. Because there will still be roles that require human intervention, not necessarily all out AI collab or all AI replacement, right? So redefine your roles. And if you're an individual contributor, start redefining your role. Write a new job description. Instead of being a learning designer, be an AI data architect, or, start to think about these things in different ways. And the way we do that is to give them space for reflection. So as they are taking courses and learning new things or having conversations with their boss, give them space to reflect in their one-on-ones and their things like that. What do you want to do? What do you like about your job that maybe we are taking away with AI, and how can we pivot that into something else? And then the infrastructure part of it is obviously the tooling and everything that we've been talking about. Same thing with systems. But the last part of it is the mindset. And that is a huge exercise in change management that I don't believe a lot of leaders are ready for yet, because they are still stuck in that gear of what's the financial motivation for me to do this. And they don't really understand, or maybe they do understand, but they don't either have the bandwidth or care to really take on that change management piece, because there's a lot of reassurance, education, things like that that have to go along with a huge shift, because some companies are going to take massive swings in one direction to try and implement as much of this as possible. I don't think all of that is going to succeed, but it's certainly going to happen. It's already happening. And so that change management piece, I think, is very important. But I don't know what your thoughts are on any of that.
Well, let's see if I can remember this. Let's talk about change, and let's talk about roles, and let's talk about things that humans are good at. And ironically, it's all part of the same argument. I love the way you put that together. Change first. I have a lot of compassion for these leaders who are saddled with an ROI target. They're almost in tears when I come and talk to them, because they're like, how can I get the yield off of this thing? And when I come along with here's all the human factors in addition to the technical factors, like, oh my God, what am I going to do? So it's kind of in the same zip code as your change management. We can be mad about it all day, but if you're not tending that spectrum, that bit of the equation, you're DOA. That's just how it's going to be. Second, as it relates to the person who's afraid about their job, there are at least two paths. There's the path that you outlined, which is a great one, which is, hey, go and look for the types of roles that are evolving, the newer types of roles. Excellent. That's a good move. Here's another move. re-architect the role you're in. Very few roles are just going to disappear this Tuesday afternoon. They're not. It doesn't work that way. I'm sure there's some exceptions, but I'm talking about the bulk of roles. They change incrementally with new tech and new process engineering. So be the one that's leading that stuff, right? And you'll learn with everybody else. Here's the good news for everybody out there. This is not math that's been going on for hundreds of years. Most everyone is learning this on the fly, and you can too. And here's the final bit of encouragement, the third thing. Humans still, to this day, and this may change over time with AI, but we retain some uniquenesses that are our superpowers. And things like empathy, things like vision casting, things like presence and being here, EQ, and understanding context. These are things that the current day AI does not do very well. AI needs the human, and now the human needs the AI. So if you can do that dance, you're gonna be okay. We all will for a while.
When you say a while, how long is a while?
I always have to say some silly disclaimer like that, because if superintelligence comes, right? Some say we're already in the singularity and all that kind of thing, but if there's like a new, almost like an alien. This is the best way I can explain. I explain it this way to people. If an alien race landed, like real forms, embodied intelligence that you could hire and have them do tasks, but they're way smarter than you. That's analogous to what may happen. I mean, many people say could happen. So I always have to leave the possibility of that. And then now I've got a whole new workforce, synthetic intelligence workforce. What am I going to do? So that's what I mean when I say for now.
So let's start rounding the bases for home here. I wanna talk about what you're working on right now, and kind of where you see things go. Because we talked a lot about where we are, but let's talk about where we're going. So what, if anything, are you working on now that you can talk to us about, and how is that going to maybe change our perspective, or has your perspective changed since any of these other things that you've worked on have come out?
The only way my perspective has changed is that the intra-business friction, I'm just going to keep using your word because it's perfect for this, is way more friction than I had ever imagined there would be. Way more. My timelines have increased as to how long it would take to ingest, to metabolize AI. So that's the biggest change to my thinking. None of the broad outlines of my thinking has changed. I just don't think the alien superintelligence is going to show up tomorrow and replace us all. But I could be wrong. The thing I'm working on right now, I'm trying to get this paper out by the end of next week, it's called L&D Next. I've done lots of the baseline stuff, but a lot of my audience are CPOs and CLOs, and I'm going to just take a swing at going, hey, if you're a CLO, this paper specifically about learning, what should you be thinking about? So that should come out next week. And then after that, these are some things I can't talk about private clients, but I'm doing more work with boards, which has been fun, and I'm learning that space as well. So those are just a couple of things in response to your question.
Okay. So without giving too much away, because this has been a really thoughtful and energizing conversation for me personally, and you've given me a lot to think about, but knowing kind of where I think you think we're headed, these people you're talking to, these boards, the CLOs, people like that, what is one idea that you hope they have that sticks with them when you leave the room?
Mind the conditions that you're putting this content into. I just can't stress that enough. You could spend millions and millions on content and fancy tech and all these types of things, but if your learners aren't motivated, if don't feel safe to try it, to actually be the leaders in their own reinvention, you're just fighting a hill. You're pushing a rock up a hill that's just too difficult. And too many times I get this blank stare, well, I don't even know what you mean. And I give this one simple example. Like if a manager, only word I'm coming up with right now is rebukes, which is weird. It's like I'm in church or something. If a manager somehow quells an individual's use of technology and asking of questions about how these things could change, it will just kill them. They'll go back up in their hole, and multiply that by lots of people, and over time that company is going to suffer for that. So the cultural dimension of this is something I think we need to think a lot more about.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think that, we almost have to go back to that old thinking of tech. You remember the old way of tech was like, think fast, do things, break stuff, that kind of stuff. And everybody kind of had freedom. Like when I remember getting my first tech job and there being like no limits to a degree on like what you could try or what you could build or whatever. That's where I think like it's almost like we got away from that at a certain point, and now it's like, can we open that gate back up a little bit? Because if we don't, you're right. People are gonna be afraid to try things. They're gonna be afraid to fail, and being afraid to fail is being afraid to learn. And I am a huge proponent of learning, and I fail all the time, and I'm totally cool with that. But I think a lot of people aren't cool with failure, leaders included, and so I think we need to get past that.
Well, to your point, there's the humans. I don't know why this happens, but some of us are wired to I'm just going to use the word fail. I think we should draw a finer point on what that means. But they're like, okay, yeah, as just Cameron alone outside of the context of a big company, I'm fine. But if you're inside a company, even if you're predisposed to trying things and failing, but they punish you, now you're in trouble. Now you're quashing the inherent, like somebody who would have done it naturally, but now you're imposing restrictions on them that will ultimately, your bottom line will suffer. Just one other thing before we go, because I have to pick up on it's all inspired by you. The nature of the company matters. Okay. Now I came from 20 years of a massive company, 100 countries, super regulated. So some of that, a lot of that risk mitigation and info security, all that stuff, that's good. Like, I'm not saying to throw that out. I'm just saying when it becomes a stranglehold, and other companies that are maybe not as encumbered by these things, and they are running fast and they are failing and learning, you got to find that balance between letting them run and not breaking the place. And it's easy for me to say that sentence, very hard to do in practice. But if you're not teasing that out every morning, particularly if you're a senior person, you're probably not doing what you should be doing.
Totally agree. I used to run my teams with what I called the guardrail philosophy. So I used to say, you're running on an 8-lane highway. There's guardrails on each side. I'll let you know when you bump into them, but otherwise just keep running.
Oh man, I liked working for you. I think that's great. I really do. I do. Yeah. Well said.
Well, Cameron, this has really been a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today. Tell people a little bit more about where they can find your work, where they can find you, and if there's anything else you'd like for them to know before we wrap up.
So listen, if you want to know more about me and what I write about, I'm on Substack. That's my main thing. So it's CameronXYZ.substack.com. So just please come and subscribe. It's free. I mean, you got nothing to lose. CameronXYZ.substack.com. And my website's simple, www.hedrickadvisory.com. And I also post on LinkedIn all the speaking engagements and things like that, so you can come and we can meet each other somewhere.
Fantastic. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us for this edition of AI in Learning. Again, my name is Justin Seeley. You can also find me on LinkedIn and all the socials. Just look for my name. I'm pretty easy to find. And we really appreciate you being here, and we hope to see you again soon. Thanks a lot.